Welcome back to Civilnet. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott, and Yerevan this week is host to Rethinking Armenia's Geopolitical and Defense Trajectory, organized by the ISA, the Institute for Security Analysis. It's a newly established diaspora-run and funded think tank in Armenia. And I'm actually honored to host Lieutenant Colonel Glen Grant, former British Army, who has been advising the Ukrainian Army, works for the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, and he's also working with the Ukrainian Parliament as a defense and a security expert. Lieutenant Colonel.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
I'll tell you, as someone with a foreign passport, I'm ethnically Armenian, but foreign passport, living here, someone who believes in this country, someone who pays taxes in this country, and who has a stake in the security of this country. The questions I'm going to ask you are related to my own worries, right? I think that having this approach as a father, as a civilian, I want to know what's going on with the defenses, with Armenia's ongoing defense reform. So why don't we start with your experience in Ukraine? What are some of the challenges that you've noticed in reforming from a Soviet towards a NATO model army, and what can Armenia learn from these challenges?
Well, there are so many. We could go on for about a week, but I mean, if I look at one or two of the key ones, I mean, the big thing about the Soviet system, as it is the lack of honesty. Is the first thing, and this inability of people to actually to be able to speak upwards and say, this is not going to work, that's not good enough, boss, can you fix this, or can we get that? And this sort of thing is only now just beginning to happen in the Ukrainian army, because the army, the fighting part of the army, has now moved from being the old professional soldiers to mainly civilians who have now entered the army. So you've got a completely different mindset there. Of people who are not, business people, lawyers who are not willing to actually to have someone say, do this, do that, without proper explanation. So that's been a major change that is happening as we speak, and is causing problems as we speak for both senior people and junior people who are unhappy with, that relationship. I think the second thing is that the care for human life, and this has been a real problem in that the old Soviet system, people are seen as numbers rather than actually human beings, and there are so many instances of people being on the front line who are some of Ukrainians leading IT technicians, engineers, people with skills that logisticians, people with skills that are needed actually in the back to make the system work. And they're in the front holding a rifle, even though often they're not very good at it, and it's not their sort of key trade in life. So I think those are two of the big things, and then the other major thing, which is I think a real shock to everybody, is that this war has shown that a war like this is a full society activity. The Ukrainian army just simply cannot manage on its own, and the front end is being supported by civilians. Often cases, money raised by wives, money raised by children for their father who's fighting, and the front line is being supported with nearly everything that apart from ammunition, and in some cases even ammunition, by civilian society that is raising money, that is buying things like drones, even buying mortars, buying mortar ammunition, food, clothing equipment, and taking that stuff forward onto the battlefield. So there's going to be exactly the same lesson to be learnt here in Armenia, that you can't fight a war just with Ministry of Defense and the army. It's no longer enough. If you're going to do this, you now have to have some sort of coherent plan or vision to involve society in every stage of the activity.
Based on your assessment in Armenia, what would you say are some of the gaps that the Ministry of Defense here is missing in what you just mentioned? What's lacking in the ongoing reform process?
Well, I think the first thing is this understanding that society has got to be involved. And that means not just seeing society as a list of numbers who can be called forward and thrown into the army, but actually using all the skills you've got in your IT companies, because the future of technology does not lie in the army, and it doesn't lie in the Ministry of Defense. It lies in business, up the road. And the boys boys and girls who are writing the software and who are making, they are the key future skill-based operations that the army requires. So there's got to be some way of actually pulling that, but also more. I mean, logistics. I mean, the best logistics is Amazon. It is miles ahead of anything that the army, not just Armenian army, but actually pretty much everybody else's army is doing. So actually pulling those things, looking for the people who know how to do things in society and finding a way of bringing them into the army, either with temporary rank or with just opening up the thinking to find a way of putting these people into the system. And you've got to do it. You've got to do it, because if you don't do it, you're going to lose. I mean, it's as simple as that. The new thinking is required at every level.
It's a tall order, it seems like. There's what you mentioned requires a level of humility and openness that we're not seeing from the defense apparatus, especially given that, for lack of a better example, it's the most Russian-oriented, Soviet-minded state apparatus that we have. Granted, they've been cleaning it for the last year, supposedly, but it's with the level of education, it's this question of what comes first, right? The next attack, or are we able to reform quickly enough, right? It's this catch-22. Do we have the time to fix the education system, open everything up, or do we have time to reform quickly?
The answer to that is with lots of things. No, you don't have time to fix them, everything, but you do have time to bring in fixes. I mean, there is no reason that you could say, let's just take for an example, brigade commanders. Okay, have you got the best people as brigade commanders? I bet you haven't. So you get the best people, you choose the 3 best people, and then you find a battle-hardened brigade commander from somewhere, another country, someone who's been fighting, Israel, it doesn't matter, Britain, America. You bring him here and you do a 1-week or 2-week quick fix. And you can do that with lots of things. Exactly the same, with IT. You've got business people. Bring someone in to the communications department, give them a week of hard, this is what we need from you, this is what you need to do from us. And humility is, you're right. I mean, this is a problem for everybody. Nobody likes to think that their professionalism has been challenged. Nobody likes to think that, hey, I'm an expert, I'm the best colonel in the army. And then someone comes along and says, well, actually, you may be, but I'm sorry, but the world has changed and the world is moving. We all hate that. But it's got to happen. Humility has got to be found somehow, because otherwise, again, you'll lose.
Yeah, especially given how the thousands of young men and women that we've given up as casualties, this kind of Soviet mentality of we don't owe the people an explanation. I mean, I'm a father of a young man. My boy is very young. I don't have to worry about that for another, couple of years, thank God. But I can't imagine being a father and not having any answers as to what happened to my son and why he was put in the position that he was put in by the people who, on behalf of the state, take 2 irreplaceable years of my child's life, and in many cases never hand him over. So how can the people hold? How can we hold the Ministry of Defense to a higher standard of accountability? Right. I'm not blaming anybody, but as an open society,
it's not just Ministry of Defense, because I mean you're actually looking at, with wartime, you're looking at all ministries. Actually, you're looking at government-wide. Yeah. I mean, the health ministry is just as involved as the defense ministry. But I think society has got to, people have got to step up. I mean, the most powerful tool that society's got is the pen. No question, the pen is writing. It's writing to people saying we're not happy. It's writing on social media and saying we're not happy. It's finding ways of actually having these discussions with friends that you have and getting them to write and say they're not happy. And I think that's the only way, is to engage the system as much as possible. I mean, it's in Ukraine. In Ukraine, people literally went to the Ministry of Defense and knocked on the door and said, I want to talk to Minister. I want to talk to the Chief of Defense. And when you've got 100 people outside, it becomes really, really quite difficult for the public relations person to go and say, terribly sorry, but we're not going to do this. Eventually, the system starts to cave and starts to have discussions with society. And that is one of the things that is changing a lot now in Ukraine, is that there is this engagement at last between the ministries and society. And society is actually saying, we will not accept this. So the head of the military medical general, she was just sacked because of failing to actually to do the job properly, and it was society that got her sacked, not the military. They just said, "Up with this, we shall not put," as they say. Yeah. So it can be done. It can be done.
Didn't Zelensky fire every single recruitment military recruitment center head?
Yeah, because they were corrupt. I mean, they were terribly corrupt. There's no question about that. They're selling these sort of, you know, the pieces of paper so that people could cross the border and not go and not be deployed on operations. And that was necessary. That was a necessary act. But unfortunately, I mean, the same thing is happening in other places. Like some doctors have been doing it, and some nurses have been signing pieces of paper and saying someone's only got one leg, even when, you know, they've got two. So yeah, so you can actually make these changes. In fact, I would argue about reform and change. The wartime is the time when you need to do it most. Not say we can't change, because if you're already not good, not changing doesn't make you better. It's only by actually doing things differently that you can actually improve and change things.
So what would the British Army do if it faced a defeat as stark as Armenia had in the last few years?
Well, there will be a lot of bloodletting. That's absolutely sure. You know, the hardness of the arguments and the hardness of the assessment would be very clear to everybody at every level, but I think that the major thing that would be expected is just ruthless open honesty. No hiding away from anything, and I know this from previous operations when we've been unhappy about. I mean, we went to the first Gulf War. I don't know if you realise, but we had to strip down like 3 vehicles to make 1 because we'd not been buying spares. So all these things were very hard talked about afterwards, and reassess where do you change the money flow so that the money goes to the right place. How do you change the operational focus so that the people who have got to do the fighting are trained properly to do the fighting, and the organisations are changed. And we'd change organisations quite quickly, and that's the only way to do it, is to be open, honest, and say we failed with this, change it. And if it doesn't look as though it's going to work properly, we'll change it again until we get it right. And that's what we do. I know this. I've been part of it.
You get the sense that there's that reflex in Armenia?
I don't think so yet. I mean, I think that it's probably missing as a tool, because people are not necessarily trained to do this. And as I said at the beginning, you know, with this problem with the Soviet world and lack of honesty in how things work, it's very, very difficult to suddenly to change that culture and to actually to make it. But you've got to do it, and it's got to come from the top. It's got to come from Minister and Chief of Defence, who have got to tell people this is no longer acceptable. You know, and if you do continue to do this, I'm sorry, but you should go and find another job. You know, there are lots of jobs as taxi drivers. Please leave, go and drive a taxi. Just don't carry on with the way that you're going here. You know, that bluntness is needed, and it's needed seriously at the moment. Leadership is the prime component for an army, and an army at war, an army in transition. And leadership is what is the only thing that is going to make the system change and develop. And hard leadership, not joking leadership, not soft.
So what's your take of the Turkish-Russian axis, who are essentially working in tandem against Armenia? What should Armenia be mindful of when implementing these reforms?
Okay, I mean, I think without going into the geopolitics too much, I mean, you have to understand that you know the world is in transition, and Russia is the thing, the driver for much of this transition that's going on at the moment. And it will be absolutely foolish to imagine that Russia is not involved somehow in wanting to dominate Armenia and do something with it, whether it's create a frozen conflict or something else. So you've got to assess, you've got to look at, you know, what is it that Turkey brings to the party that they've got what potential capabilities what potential training, what potential ideas, doctrines that they will bring. And then on the other side, you've got to look at Russia. So the analysts here have got to look at Russia hard. What is Russia actually doing? What is it doing well? How's it fighting? And then you've got to create a system that is at least capable of holding that and understanding it. So the soldiers must understand how Russia fights. So the exercises from now onwards must actually be exercises as if you are fighting Russia, as if you're fighting Russia perhaps with Turkish equipment. As we've talked about before, you know, if they've got a new anti-tank weapon and it fires 14 kilometers, you've got to be prepared to be able to do something in that 14 kilometers. You can't just ignore it. So there are lots of things like that can be done, but to do it, you've got to be honest about what the other side can do. And that's then got to drive your organization, your structures, your training, and your thinking, your doctrine.
Tell us, what is an army that is, or a country that has successfully reformed its armed forces at a fundamental level in wartime, that Armenia can obviously take inspiration from?
I mean, obviously the big ones were America and Britain in both the First and the Second World War.
In the middle of the war?
No, just from the moment the war started, it was reform. Wow. I mean, so it's not, reform's probably the wrong word. It's change. You change your focus to meet what the enemy is going to do to you. Don't call that reform. What it is change. Why would you have an organization that doesn't work? So, for example, I mean, what did we do? We created the Special Air Service so that we could attack aircraft in the desert behind the front lines, and they killed more aircraft than did our aircraft kill enemy aircraft. So that's the sort of change that you've got to make, and you've got to make these things not with long discussions, but it's got to be eyeballs to eyeballs. You need to do this. Please go and do it. You have my authority. Go. And this sort of change is absolutely fundamental in war. You can't hide away and keep the old thing that has, and in this case, has failed once. Why would you keep something that has failed? I mean, is foolish beyond belief. You have to change, and change quickly. Know your enemy, make changes.
You're preaching to the converted. I'm in total agreement with that. I mean, it's staggering to so many of us. I mean, in Armenia, you'll commonly hear that, you know, the Israel model. What are some countries that you think that Armenia should emulate in terms of total defense, in terms of being able to put up a fight against a much larger, much richer, much better equipped enemy? Well,
I mean, I think the closest in terms of thinking as it is at the moment is probably Estonia. Estonia and Israel. Israel because of the high tech and because of the whole nation approach. Estonia because it actually realizes that you've got to have structures that work in peacetime before you take them to the war. So that means that your reserves, all your reserves have got to be in structures, and they've got to practice. Because you can't put them together. You can't take numbers, put loads of 100 people together, say go and fight there. It won't work. No trust, no skills, no anything.
Unit cohesion.
No unit cohesion, all these things. So the Estonians have got this fairly right. The Finns are pretty much the same.
Well, didn't they train Estonia?
Yeah, they trained some. So actually, Estonia benefited from Britain, Finland, and America actually working together in many cases. But yeah, so I think that's those, you know, it's the high tech side of the best of high tech of Israel, alongside some of the practical steps taken by Estonia and Finland to make their systems work. There are not many other countries of similar size that you can look at and say, yeah, we want to do that. Britain is too professional, too narrow, because its whole concept mindset is different. And of course, it's got air power coming out of its ears.
Seas protecting it on each side.
Got, you know, aircraft carriers. So it's a different animal. So you can't go down that one.
What do you make of Armenia's recent? I mean, the deal that we struck with France, that French instructors will come and essentially just reform the Armenian military, will provide training, know-how, equipment.
They won't reform the military. I mean, that is reform or change of the military has got to be done by Armenians.
Yeah.
with decisions made by Armenians.
They'll advise, then I'll
But
change the language.
they'll advise, and they'll give advice on what they think they should do. There is always the danger with this, and this is why I come to things like this, of people not understanding the culture. And the culture is, the French culture for military, which is very professional, is not going to be the same as the culture here. So there's going to be problems with that. But the training from the French, hopefully will be world class. And when they get equipment from France and then they're trained by France, then they will be able to use it. But then the thinking, the doctrine, and how to fight and where to fight, and the hills, this is not like France. So there's got to be some hard thinking about structures, organizations, and how the new equipment goes into the system and how it's used.
Final question, Lieutenant Colonel. What you're now placed in charge of the Armenian Armed Forces. What are the 2 to 3 key changes you would make immediately that would lead to the greatest increase in Armenia's combat capabilities and ability to defend itself and survive?
I think the first one would be to choose the 3 best officers in the armed forces and make them the brigade commanders. Because if you're going to have a fight, only infantry can take and hold ground. Only infantry can stop the next war. Artillery can't stop it. Artillery can help, but it can't actually hold the ground and hold the border. So you need absolutely your best 3 people, 4 people doing that job, wherever they are. I would even say whatever rank they are, because this is too important to worry about administrative rank or has he got a degree or something like this. Those things are nonsense. This is fighting, and therefore the best fighters have got to be in charge of things. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is much more coordinated training. Artillery engineers and things, because again, coordination is key, because if you're not totally coordinated, you're slower. And if you want to be like Formula One wheel changing, which is the quality, you have to rehearse that and rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it. So you need to work out what you're going to do, what is the equivalent actions of Formula One, and then you drive those standards to death, day and night, until you can actually do them. And in that process of doing that, you can be absolutely sure that others will recognize you're doing that, and that will start to increase your deterrent effect, that people will see that. And I think the last thing, which is not necessarily military, but I will be asking for absolutely the best diplomats in the country, or the best people in the country, civilian diplomats or just civilian, and get them out to all the countries that can be and are likely allies for Armenia, and shout loudly, because that is really important. And that's another lesson from Ukraine, is that if your diplomats are weak, then the response from the countries that those diplomats are in is also weak.
Lieutenant Colonel, it's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again for watching. It's been Patrick from Civilnet. I'll speak with you very soon.